Okay, so thank you again for all that joined. And my name is Yair, and I'm based here together with Andrew, actually, in the area of Greater Philadelphia. I belong to several organizations, including I'm a physician by training to the American Jewish Medical Association, but also this organization called the Hope for Israel Alliance is hosting many of these webinars. And it's basically a grassroots community-based organization that is based, it started in the United States, but now we have representatives in Sweden, in Switzerland, and London, and France, and Australia, a big membership. And basically our goals are to support Israel, especially during the last year, to fight anti-Semitism with everything that we have, and also support a democratic, healthy, good Israel in the future that will continue to thrive. So with that, thank you everybody for joining. And I see that Max has joined us. Max, if you have a chance, click the button rename, because for some reason, everybody popped up as Abby Cranes today. All right, so we're really fortunate to have these amazing three speakers with us today. And I'm gonna introduce, first of all, Andrew. And Andrew Goretsky, I've worked with him for almost a year, and he is the regional director of ADL in Philadelphia, but basically Eastern Pennsylvania, Southern New Jersey, Delaware. Until a few years ago, he was the dean of students at Arcadia University. And really his background, he's been in higher education, and correct me if I'm wrong, for over 20 years before coming to the ADL. The dean of students, he was working in a student affair. He has his doctorate in higher education administration from GW. And I think I saw recently, just a few months ago, Andrew, that you received a special honor at George Washington, the Dean's Outstanding Alumni Achievement Award. So congratulations for that. So this is Andrew. And Andrew, I'll pass it up to you. Maybe you can introduce the senior vice presidents of the organization, of ADL.
Absolutely. And Yair, thank you for introducing me, and thank you for bringing ADL to your webinar series. It's been a tough year, obviously, since 10/7. But I think as we talk about modern day anti-Semitism, the speakers we have joining us is going to be paramount to the conversation today. So first, it is my pleasure to introduce Marina Rosenberg. Marina is our Senior Vice President for International Affairs at the Anti-Defamation League. Marina has a distinguished career in diplomacy, including her role as Israel's ambassador to Chile, where she played a pivotal role in strengthening Israel's international relations in Latin America. She leads ADL's global efforts to combat anti-Semitism and hate, promoting the security of Jewish communities worldwide and advocating for a safe and democratic Israel with teams in the United States, Europe, and Israel. And then we also have Max Sevilla. And Max, you would think I would know this by heart already, but I don't know this by heart, so I'm going to make sure I read this as well. Max is Senior Vice President of National Affairs. He leads ADL's federal relations, including engagement on Capitol Hill and with the executive branch. He also oversees the agency's state and local advocacy, as well as its intergroup and interfaith efforts, working with various Jewish and non-Jewish advocacy organizations and interest groups to build stronger relations. Max also leads ADL's Civil Rights Department. Max Sevilla joined ADL in 2019 with extensive experience in Washington, D.C., focusing on immigration reform, digital and civil rights, and community engagement. Most recently, he served the mayor of New York City as director of the Office of Federal Legislative Affairs, and then as external affairs director of the Office of the Chief Technology Officer. Previously, Max represented Latino elected officials at the federal level as director of the Washington, D.C. Office of the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials. Earlier in his career, he planned and directed immigration reform campaigns as the ACLU's immigration lobbyist. Max also has extensive direct Capitol Hill experience, having served Representative Gerald Nadler and Representative, and I don't know the first name, I'll see it, Hastings. There we go. Excellent. Max earned his BA from Florida International University and his JD from Georgetown University Law Center. So thank you to both of you for making the time this evening, and I'll pass it back to you, Yair.
Thank you. And Andrew, thank you for all that you've been doing. For those who live in the area of Greater Philadelphia, know the nonstop activities of Andrew and Abby Crane and their teams, basically nonstop with universities, with schools, with lawsuits, with hospitals and healthcare systems. Really, their work has been so important. So I'm going to start a question for both of you, actually. I'm Israeli originally. I'm an Israeli American, and there's a lot of different American Jewish organizations in the United States, but none of them are super famous. Probably the ones that every Israeli has heard of is AIPAC and Haliga Neged Hashmatza, which is basically ADL. And we know about it, and we know that it's an organization that fights anti-Semitism. In fact, I think that the mission statement, correct me if I'm wrong, is to stop defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment for all. And this, in essence, is kind of like what has been happening not only in the United States, but everywhere in the world in the last year or so. So my first question to both of you, Marina and Max, and your perspectives are interesting because one of you, Marina, is more international and Max is more domestic within the United States. Is with everything, with this super important organization of ADL, how has the workflow and everything has changed for the organization over the course of the last 10 months or almost a year, unfortunately, 11 months?
Max, do you want to start, since I think that your work changed a lot?
I'm happy to follow you. I always defer to Marina.
Okay, so yeah, first of all, thanks for the invitation, and thank you, Andrew. I have to confess that I've been in the US only for a year, and I still have not visited Philadelphia. So I'm flagging this to Andrew because I'm waiting for an invite, and I'll be happy to visit.
Oh, be careful, Marina. We might make that soon.
So the ADL has been working in fighting anti-Semitism for over 111 years. And we've been seeing a growing trends of anti-Semitism in the US and in other countries in the world much before October 7th, unfortunately. But after October 7th, obviously the anti-Semitism has just skyrocketed. And we've been seeing this tsunami of hate against Jews, against Israel, against Jewish institutions all over the world. In the US alone, we're talking about a rise of 140% in anti-Semitic incidents from 2023 compared to 2022. And we've been seeing similar numbers in Europe, for example, in the UK, 147%, in South Africa, 204% rise in anti-Semitic incidents. And really in all the countries, doesn't matter how big the Jewish community is, and if there's even a Jewish community. So this means that for ADL, we had to pivot quite a bit of our work post-October 7th. Part of it is supporting Israel as a Jewish state and its right to defend itself, supporting the families of hostages that until this day are crying to release their loved ones, but then also dealing with this anti-Semitism. And Max will talk later about campus, for example, is one of the most central topics that ADL had to pivot on, because before October 7th, we were not one of the organizations that were most active on US campus, for example, and that had to be changed, of course, after we've seen everything that is going on there against Jewish students, against Jewish professors, etc. We also pivoted our legal work quite a bit, and we are focused much more on what we can do on the legal aspect, especially in the US, but not only. We're also supporting our partners around the world. Part of this legal work is funding and creating this call center for Jewish students and professors that can call and ask for free legal advice on incidents of anti-Semitism that they've been facing on campus. Another example, and we can go into it later, is a huge lawsuit that we filed early July against Iran, Syria, and North Korea for their part in supporting Hamas, and by that habilitating the atrocities of October 7th. So these are like two major topics that we changed a lot. But I think that October 7th really influenced the way that we look into fighting anti-Semitism worldwide. I'll give just one example and I'll pass it to Max, who has not been able yet to change his name on the Zoom. For example, globally, so we created before October 7th this global task force to fight anti-Semitism called J7. So it's comprised of the 7 biggest Jewish communities in the world outside of Israel. It's the US, Canada, Australia, Argentina in Latin America, and in Europe, it's Germany, France, and the UK. And we met from time to time before October 7th to share best practices and to discuss different issues. But post-October 7th, we started meeting on a weekly basis to not just share information and best practices, but to really see together what are the trends and how we can fight it together, both online, offline, including the UN role, etc. And that has been a major tool in our global work post-October 7th in fighting anti-Semitism. Max, I'll pass it to you because I'm sure that you have a lot to add.
Thanks, and thanks for having me. I apologize. I've had computer issues, and the reason why I was having these computer glitches is because our cybersecurity has been one of the things that has ramped up since 10/7 in particular. We are rebooting now computers every week. I turned it on before joining you, and then it rebooted, and it took me a moment. So I apologize for that. But yes, so I handle basically all of ADL's domestic work, and just to put it into context, we've seen an increase of anti-Semitism in the United States of 800% in 10 years. We were working with the White House on a national strategy to counter anti-Semitism before 10/7 because the need was so grave, so real, so serious that the federal government, the Biden administration, Congress was focused on anti-Semitism. And then 10/7 happened. When 10/7 happened, as Marina said, anti-Semitism increased by about 140% in the United States. On campus, which is another of the areas that I lead, anti-Semitism increased over 300%. So everything changed as it needed to. We were an organization focused on fighting anti-Semitism, and yet we needed to double down on interventions and on focus. We had done, for example, in August of 2023, we co-chaired the March on Washington. It was the 60th anniversary of MLK's I Have a Dream speech during the March on Washington for civil rights. We partner with other communities in order to fight all forms of hate. And that was something that, that we find to be very meaningful, really important. And then when 10/7 happened, we didn't have the bandwidth to continue doing business as usual because everything's had changed. So in terms of the work that I do, how has this sort of tragedy and moment changed our approach? We are much more focused on anti-Semitism, much more directly, the house is on fire sort of moment. And therefore we are focused, we are really dealing with the crisis of the moment in real time. And it continues to evolve and it continues to change and it changes from place to place. So early on, it was support for our colleagues in Israel. Many of us have family in Israel. We have a Jerusalem office. It was crucial that we will be there for them, that we seek partner communities, allies to show solidarity and support for the tragedy that we all lived through. And pretty soon we started seeing the hate, right? The anti-Semitism, the anti-Israel, anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism that initiated in the Middle East sort of permeate all of US society. And so we started dealing with Hamas sympathizers on sort of like our streets. I live in New York, and there were rallies, around the office, a couple of blocks from the ADL office, and my 12-year-old goes to a Jewish day school, and we were having to pick her up because there were rallies by Columbus Circle, and so like it really permeated our daily lives, and certainly our work priorities and approaches. We dealt with anti-Semitism at the municipal level in partnership with Andrew and the 25 regional offices that we have at ADL. We dealt and been dealing with the rallies and manifestations of support for terrorism and anti-Semitism that eventually moved to our college campuses. As Marina said, we are not an on-campus organization. We had programs that educated students and administrators before, but this was a somewhat small aspect of the work that ADL does in the United States. And almost overnight, the need was so dire, it was so immediate that myself and colleagues built an entire campus approach. And that campus approach was not to repeat what others were doing, was not for ADL to like show up and be in a place because of the need. It was being impactful and actually countering the sort of animosity and anti-Semitism that we're seeing. And so our strategy and our value add has been exerting maximum pressure on the decision makers in order for them to protect the Jewish communities on campus, the students, the faculty, the administrators. And that has been a distinct approach of ADL on the issue of anti-Semitism. Well, there are partner organizations that are dealing with student life, and there are partner organizations that are engaged with faculty. We know that administrators, presidents, and others know what to do, which is do the right thing. They just largely have not have the leadership to show up for their Jewish communities. And so we put pressure through a campaign that we call Not on Our Campus. We mobilize hundreds of thousands of Jewish parents and alumni and donors and other interested and relevant influencers on campus. We informed members of Congress. A lot of the hearings that you've seen from the House, ADL behind the scenes has been informing, providing material and education and really maximizing that pressure point. And then we did the report card, and I'm happy to sort of like dive deeper into any of these areas as we go through the conversation.
Thank you both for your intros. Max, you actually perfectly segued into what my follow-up question was going to be by bringing that up, which is, one, the inception of the report card, and if you can talk a little bit about that and some of the thought process behind that. And then in particular, if you could also talk about, because I'm not sure all of our audience members are aware of the unified recommendations that came out from ADL, AJC, the Jewish Federations of North America, and Hillel International, as it talks about combating anti-Semitism on campus. So would love it if you could talk a little bit more about the report card in particular, because we know that when that was rolled out, there were people who were in favor of it. There was some questions about it. So maybe that inception, and then talk about the unified recommendations that have come from all four organizations.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So yes, we launched an ADL campus anti-Semitism report card last April. It was because we were hearing from parents and students that they needed tools and resources in order to understand what was happening on college and university campuses across the United States. It came from the community that there was this need. And I would say that ADL was uniquely positioned because we are an evidence-based organization where we're uniquely positioned to responsibly deal with, create the methodology needed in order to assess the level of anti-Semitism and the responses from campus to protect the Jewish communities. So we went about it the way that ADL does things. really focused, really responsibly and comprehensively. And we assessed 85 different universities. We looked at over 20 criteria, right, that we judged, that we believe, and we had informed the universities that we thought that these were key elements in order to safeguard the well-being of Jewish students and faculty. And then we communicated repeatedly with university administrators and with experts. We had a field of experts that supported and informed our work, some internal like Andrew and other partners from academia and from community organizations, etc. This was work that we did quickly because the need was so immediate, but at the same time, we went about it being very comprehensive. And it didn't surprise, I mean, certainly did not surprise me. I think few were surprised that a majority of the schools that we assessed that represented about 85% of Jewish students on campus in the United States, that the majority of these universities did not meet the standard of protecting their Jewish communities. So but we didn't stop there. So while we informed the parents and the students for them to make decisions last year, we communicated with administrators. We also looked to partner with them, and we provided resources, and we've been providing resources ever since in order to support their growth and them doing better. And our approach is not only to shine a light and exert pressure through the report card, but it's also to partner with decision makers for them to do better, so that every one of the universities that we're assessing eventually, ideally quickly, get to passing grades, if not straight A's. And so ADL has the know-how in order to support these universities doing the right thing according to these 20 criteria and a set of recommendations that we have been making to them over the past year. We also took the summer, so the idea was, let's use the summer to support the universities, and in that support and through other means, and we make sure that September is different than May for Jewish students. And so one of the things that we did is we partner with the Conference of Presidents, with the JFNA, with federations, with AJC, and with Hillel. And we together came up with 8 recommendations that we believe will really move the needle really drastically in terms of the Jewish experience on campus and anti-Semitism. And so what's happening now is that we are going before administrators with one voice, right? One chair between these big Jewish organizations and endorsed by another 12 organizations. So that when we talk to them, we talk with one voice. When each one of us visits with decision makers, we are reinforcing that which we know will make a difference. And we are coordinating and cooperating in our conversations.
Fascinating, Max. And I have a lot of follow-up questions, but I want to start by asking Marina a question. So you're basically facing or leading the fight against anti-Semitism globally, often against or outside of the United States. We here in the United States, Andrew, I'm not formal with anything, but I'm involved in different things. And, we see the K-12. Andrew has been dealing nonstop with, for example, the school district of Philadelphia. We've been dealing with campus anti-Semitism universities, specifically around Philadelphia. We have a lot of problems with the Haverford College, and that's an ongoing issue. So a lot of the attention in the United States is the battle against anti-Semitism, the encampments, the colleges, the universities. But I want to ask you, the majority of the people on this call are people from the United States. We don't know so much about what's happening outside of our country, South America, Europe, maybe Australia, New Zealand. I'm a 3rd generation Holocaust survivor. I'm very close to my grandmother, who was 96 and still alive. And she's from Hungary and survived Auschwitz, etc. And I want to hear from you, what is happening in terms of anti-Semitism and the new anti-Semitism, which is really anti-Zionism outside of the United States?
Yeah, that's a great question, Yael. So, I would like to talk about around 4 trends that we're seeing outside the US and those that we're seeing in the US but not seeing outside. So the whole mobilization on campus that we're seeing here and the disturbing rise in anti-Semitism in K-12 school is less of an issue outside the US, with the exception perhaps of Canada, that has also been facing issues on campus, a few incidents in the UK in some of the campuses, one of the campuses in France, but it's not in the magnitude that we're seeing here in the US. What we are seeing there, and is similar to the US, is how the anti-Zionism, as you mentioned, has become very mainstream, more than before. So the demonizing of Jews, Jewish institutions, and of course of Israel, using the word Zionist as a mask for anti-Semitism instead of saying Jewish, doxing Jewish professionals. So doxing, for those who don't know, it's basically publishing on social media or website information about Jews. Normally it's Jewish professionals, sometimes it's doctors or artists or any type of service givers with the purpose of people harassing them, either online or physically in their houses or their workplace. So their phone number, their place of work, or the home address are all published. So this has happened in the US. It has been happening also in Australia, especially against physicians like yourselves, but also other professionals. And there were a few cases in Europe as well. Of course, the whole demonizing of Zionists, it brought also boycotting, not just of Israeli or so-called Israeli restaurants or other institutions, but Zionist restaurants and stores. What does it mean, Zionist? It means Jewish stores or restaurants. Nobody asked the owner of a restaurant if he's a pro-Israel, anti-Israel, and if he supports the Palestinian cause or not. And just because they're Jewish, so they're being targeted. We're also seeing a soft boycott. That sometimes it's even worse because you can't really prove that the person or the institution is being boycotted. So this is both for Israeli institutions and individuals like academia, for example, or Israeli artists and musicians, but also Jewish artists, musicians, including here in the US, and we're seeing it also in Europe and a few cases in Latin America. Another trend that Max mentioned is basically the justification of October 7th and support for terrorism, if it's by using Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, flags and symbols, or by calling, from the river to the sea, and so forth. We've all seen it here in the US, and we've been seeing it also in Europe and Canada, of course, and other places. A third trend, I would say, is the denial of October 7th, either basically saying it never happened and Israel is making it up, or that it happened but it was Israelis that were the attackers, or downplaying the sexual violence of Hamas against Israeli women. So this is, again, a trend that we see both here in the US and around the world, on social media, but also in demonstrations. And of course, we're seeing it in the Arab world, where there's hardly any Jews over there. And the last one, that is a trend that is specific for a few countries and is not, thank God, is not relevant for the US, is governments that are basically anti-Zionist or political leaders that are anti-Zionist, and therefore take action not just against Israel, but in that way also discriminate directly or indirectly against their own Jewish citizens. So we've been seeing that in South Africa, of course, that I assume that everybody heard about their role in basically representing Hamas in the ICJ, right? And also taking action in the ICC, in the International Criminal Court. We've been seeing that in Latin America with Colombia, with President Petro, that is very anti-Zionist, and like every Monday and Tuesday when he's bored, he just tweets something outrageous, saying that Israelis are like Nazis and that it's a genocidal state, etc. We've been seeing something similar with less intensity in the past from the president of Chile, and of course Turkey and some non-friendly Arab countries. So I would say that those are the main things that we're seeing outside the US. I will say that, of course, there are many governments like the US that are taking both anti-Semitism very seriously. And just like in the US, there's a special envoy and a national action plan to combat anti-Semitism. So we've been seeing that years before in Europe, in countries like Germany and France and the UK. And in general, most of the EU countries have been taking for a while very concrete measures to fight anti-Semitism. And yet, post-October 7th, we've been seeing the numbers skyrocketing in all the countries.
Marina, thank you for that thorough roundup of what's happening globally and the discussion around, the anti-Zionism and how people are interchanging Zionism with Jew and anti-Semitism. Max, I'm wondering, for the members of our audience who are watching this and potentially for people who are watching the recording afterwards, I think one of the things people face when they're out in the community is this concept of, why is anti-Zionism anti-Semitism? Like, I'm not against Jews, I'm just against Israel. We know that that's false. We know anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, but really wondering what advice you would have for people who may be facing that in their communities and how they can address that based on the work that you're doing from the domestic end.
Yeah, look, I would say it's unfortunate, but October 7th proves the point on the demonstrations, on the hate that we're seeing on streets, on campus and elsewhere. The line is blurred oftentimes. If we ever needed an illustration of how these anti-Zionism manifests as anti-Semitism, unfortunately, we've been reminded day in and day out for the past 10 months. So I also lead government relations for the organization. That's all our federal engagement with the White House and agencies and with Congress, and support the work of state and local advocacy through our 25 regional offices. And one of the key aspects of two of the key policy efforts that we pursued have to do with defining anti-Semitism. So there is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition, the IRA definition, that is sort of a baseline, is foundational to fighting anti-Semitism, because it's hard, if not impossible, to fight these forms of hate unless you're able to define it and recognize it and then address it. And so what we have been fairly successful in over 30 states and in thousands of entities across the globe in enacting the IRA definition. The national strategy to counter anti-Semitism that the Biden administration has put forth, it includes the IRA definition. The Department of Education, in dealing with the civil rights violations that are happening on campus against Jewish students, is using the IRA definition. And a key priority, and you'll see these in a lot of our call to actions in the way that we engage the ADL community, volunteer leaders, has to do with promoting and supporting the enactment of the IRA definition so that it's law, and that law informs the actions of the federal government, but also educates, informs, and supports the fight against anti-Semitism throughout the country. Relatedly, the other piece of key legislation that we've been working on is, as I said, the Biden administration put forth this historic effort to counter anti-Semitism, and we have taken the most critical aspects of that plan and turned them into legislative language for Congress to enact, so that this is not a 1 or 2 year plan, but instead it's something permanent, that it's part of the rhythm of the work that the U.S. federal government does. And so those are some of the key and critical aspects of the defining anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, and then going about fighting it. Marina, maybe you want to add to the anti-Zionism piece.
No, I think you said everything that needs to be said. I'll just say, Andrew, to your initial question, of course, when people face anti-Zionism, that again, as Max alluded to, is anti-Semitism, they need to speak out. Like, don't be shy. Don't think that it's because I support Israel, so maybe, it's justified. No, it's not. So report it at ADL website. You can report any case of anti-Semitism, including anti-Zionism, and our representatives in the regional office will get in contact. And don't be afraid to speak out and give a piece of your mind. Of course, being aware of any threats that might be in your environment, but we shouldn't think about it twice. And one of the problems that we've all been facing in monitoring anti-Semitism in the U.S. and outside the U.S. is that sometimes people get into the habit of normalizing anti-Semitism, and then even Jews that are facing anti-Semitism are not even reporting it because they think that it's not worth the hassle, or nobody will take me seriously, or I'm not sure if it's anti-Semitism. If there's a doubt, report it, and we'll help you determine if you face anti-Semitism or not.
Thank you both so much for both of that. We're about to jump into questions from the Q&A, and I'm going to pass it over to you. But as I've been monitoring those questions, I just want to throw in a comment after both of those answers. One of the questions, a member of the audience has asked, what's the ADL's answer to the rise in anti-Semitism since it's becoming normalized, and how can you along help with that? I want to start part of that answer, and I'm sure the rest of it's going to come through the Q&A, landing specifically on something Max talked about, which was the IRA definition. The really looking to get individuals to adopt that, using that as the measure of what is legally, what is recommended to be reviewed and done, is going to be an important aspect of this, because when that becomes normalized and commonplace, that will help with this. So that's part of it. There's going to have to be multi-pronged to that, which I'm sure we'll get through with the rest of the Q&A. Yair, I think you're going to start jumping and asking questions from that.
Andrew, can I add to what you just said before we move to Q&A? I would be remiss if I didn't bring up that, yes, we're seeing this resurgence of anti-Semitism, again, 800% over 10 years. As you were saying, I think in large part, this is happening because anti-Semitism, but hate more generally, has been normalized and has moved from the fringes into the mainstream. We know that social media has contributed greatly to an unhealthy environment. A digital one in particular, ADL has a Center for Technology and Society that is really important in pushing back against this hate. But the main point that I wanted to add, and it hasn't been part of this conversation because we're so focused on that initial question, how has our work changed since 10/7, is that we are seeing anti-Semitism and hate from across the spectrum. So while we focus largely so far in the conversation on far left anti-Semitism, it exists and it's dangerous, and we are facing it, and we see it grow and become mainstream coming from the far right too, okay? I think that that's a really important point. And as I speak about the sort of like pro-Hamas demonstrations and we see physical violence and destruction of property on campus from sort of like one sector of society. We also have incidents, for example, in South Carolina on a college campus of hate and anti-Semitism that is coming from the far right. And as the volatility of our current political climate sort of moves through this electoral period, I think that it's really important to be keenly aware that the threat and the hate, unfortunately, is shared and exists across the political spectrum.
I want to actually put an exclamation point on that one too, because it's what we do talk about in all the regions as well, and even evidence here in the Philadelphia region from Eastern Pennsylvania, Southern New Jersey, and Delaware, as we know the encampments and the protests that have happened on that end. For those of you who don't know, just this past weekend, there was a march by a far right-wing white supremacist blood tribe group that was walking through downtown Harrisburg, wearing either all black with red masks or all red with black masks, and carrying black flags with swastikas on them. And so, you know, as we see it through all ends of the spectrum, it's going to have to be continued to be pushed back and fought on all ends of that.
This is very interesting, Max and Andrew. I mean, I'll tell you the truth. I'm very involved in a lot of WhatsApp groups, and the person who has asked the question that you answered, Karen Averill, is one of the greatest activists of Greater Philadelphia. And we're both on a lot of different groups, and we're all very much aware of the liberal, progressive campus anti-Semitism. I was not aware. It's almost not so much discussed publicly that there's a growing problem also with the right wing, like you said, what happened in Harrisburg. That's really interesting and concerning. I want to be a little bit of a nudnik and ask the same question that Andrew asked Marina, and also combine it with one of the questions from the Q&A. So the first question of the Q&A was talking about the fact that we all see, and I'm sure also outside of the United States, but I've personally seen, you know, the when you have these against Israel, pro-Palestinian, you see the Azadin al-Qassam, which is the military arm of the Hamas, big flags, and the Hezbollah flag just like a week ago or so. And we see this. And we just had a couple of months ago, earlier in the summer, a webinar, which was fascinating, with Einat Wilf. And we talked about how, you know, now anti-Zionism is the new anti-Semitism, but every few generations, it's focused on something else, maybe race, maybe, you know, money, maybe religion. And now it's more the anti-Zionist. So the reason that I want to ask this again is because, Marina, just a few years ago, before you joined the ADL, you were the ambassador of Israel in one of the largest and, you know, most impactful countries in South America, Chile, which is one of my favorite countries. And I really want to know, you have been dealing and representing Israel in front of a whole country. So what do you feel about this? Because this comes up again and again. What do we say to people who are like, oh yeah, we have nothing wrong with Jews? I know that you kind of answered it, but it's so important that I want to hear it again, because that's the anti-Semitism now. Everybody's talking about how Israel is terrible and racist and genocide and all of that.
Yeah. So first we have to give credit to Einat Wilf, who's amazing. And for years and years, she's been flagging the issue of anti-Zionism, right? Before it became a trend now that we're all aware of and talking about it. And also at ADL, I mean, our CEO, Jonathan Greenblatt, for years have been saying anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And, you know, he's been getting some hard criticism from different parts, including from within the Jewish community. And as Max said, now I think that he's proven right. And I think that what we need to learn from this, Yair, is that we cannot just focus on one type of anti-Semitism at a time. We can't do it. We can't ignore that all the time there's all the type of anti-Semitism. So you have from the far right, you have from the jihadists, and you have it from the far left. And this is also why when we deal with anti-Semitism, the solution needs to be holistic. You cannot just focus on working with the government. You cannot just focus on educational programs. You cannot just focus on the legal aspect. You have to put effort in all of it together. And one person and one organization cannot do it alone. We have to do it together and collaborate. And this is why Max's team is putting so much effort in expanding partnerships on this. And, you know, I lived in Chile for 3 years as ambassador of Israel, and I've seen it there, and I've seen it, of course, in other countries that I served, where the anti-Zionism is sometimes less in your face than it is now. And you have anti-Semites that are just smart enough, or thought that they were smart enough, to stop saying, I hate Jews and Jews are not welcome, and just replace the word with Zionist, and then basically saying, you know, there was a Palestinian politician in Chile that was a candidate for president. And he said, I have no problems with Jews. My problem is with Zionists. And I hate Zionists, and they are murderers, and they created a genocidal state. So one way of dealing with it is going to the rationale and giving the history and explaining what Zionism is about, and that Israel is not an apartheid state, and Israel is not a genocidal state, and that you have to differentiate between government policies and the people, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't think it's enough, because many of the students that we see in the US and in other countries that are going out and yelling stuff against Israel and holding signs like From the River to the Sea and others, they don't know the history. This is also a generation, and I don't want to generalize. I have kids at home as well, but they get their news from TikTok. Like, if a video is more than 30 seconds, 60 seconds, that's it. Like, you know, you can't listen. So most of the young generation are not going to sit on a webinar and listen to us talk about the history of Zionism and how Israel has the right to defend itself. So I think that what can we do more is the personal experience, the one-on-one, the talking to those people as a person, not as a representative, not of Israel and not of the Jewish community, just coming really from each one of us, from our personal experience, explaining why the atrocities of October 7 has been influencing each and every one of us, regardless of the fact if we have family in Israel or do not have family in Israel. Explaining the connection that we have with Israel, and talking more from the heart, and not just, you know, being a history professor and giving the whole lecture. Is that enough? No, but it's one more aspect that we have to put more emphasis on.
Thank you. Just a follow-up question to that, and a reminder to everybody. We will finish at, usually it's 60 minutes up to 75 minutes, but there's a lot of questions from the audience, and Andrew has things to say. So we will have a hard stop at 9:15, meaning in 25 minutes. I want to follow up the question that was in the Q&A and ask Max, actually combine two questions to one. We were talking about the flags of Hamas, Azadin and Qassam, PFLP, Hezbollah. So people are asking, the Q&A is, what do we do about this? Is there any legal action? What can U.S. Homeland Security do if they're involved? And the second question that I'm going to combine into from the Q&A is, how are you or your office, Max, is dealing directly with a U.S. Special Envoy or generally with the administration to continue fight the anti-Semitism nationally and internationally?
Yeah, I'll start with the first question, and then Marina and I will both team up on discussing the work of ADL with State Department and with the rest of the federal administration. So look, we are seeing all these demonstrations, and we are seeing all these different forms of hate, and that they're happening, or that people are expressing themselves even in a hateful manner. That is just part of the American experience. And we want to, in the work that we do, we are a civil rights organization, we have a civil rights lens, and we are thinking both of the moment and we're thinking of the future. We work towards responsible actions, initiatives, and legislation, or government actions that are responsible and cannot be turned around and used against any other sort of unpopular community or situation in the future. But the thing is that oftentimes what we have been seeing is these antagonistic, anti-Israel agitators crossing lines, right? We are seeing them defacing monuments and government buildings and private spaces, restaurants. We're seeing them enter campus buildings, administration buildings. So what we're pushing hard on government officials and campus administrators for the rule of law to be preserved, for there to be consequences when individuals and groups cross lines into illegality. And therefore, we are demanding that these laws be applied equally between all groups, right? The way that they may have been used to protect, I don't know, the Black community a few years ago should be the same way that those rules and regulations are used to protect the Jewish communities nowadays on sort of like municipal streets or on campus. And then the other piece is because we've got this policy and legal expertise where we see that the laws or the code of conducts are weak. We've been working in order to update them, upgrade them, and make sure that they're applicable to the circumstances that we're seeing nowadays. And we are finding, we're finding a lot of responsiveness. We are seeing lots of rules changed. We are seeing a lot of partnership opportunities. The one thing that to me continues to be highly problematic is that we're not seeing consequences. That even when people are being arrested and, like after Bibi Netanyahu spoke in front of Congress, you may all have seen the disaster that it was just outside of Union Station, the train station in DC, and the halls of Congress, the defacing of monuments and things that are absolutely legal. Most of those people were arrested for a minute and then released and gone free. Or the same thing with some of the encampments when they have been broken up and people have had crossed lots and lots of lines and were arrested. We have instances of universities that were concerned for the welfare of those that had committed crimes and had been arrested, and there are instances of universities paying their bail and housing them again in dorms, like immediately after their actions. And similarly, we're seeing a lot of these agitators and criminals face no consequence, go back to school, and plan, train, and repeat their actions once more. And so that is why being at the table and just engaging conversation is not enough. We're using every tool available through advocacy and pressure, and everything that ADL does, sort of like best in class. We are using all of those tools in order to change circumstances and protect the Jewish community and all other communities that are facing this current state of hate that we're seeing on our streets, that we're seeing on our communities, that we're seeing on our campuses and elsewhere. With regards to the work with the federal government, with the Biden administration, the relationship has been very close. We work closely with the White House itself. We helped inform, for example, the national strategy to counter anti-Semitism. We provided over 33 initiatives that made it into these 200 plus effort. We have been probably the main driver of the implementation of that national strategy. And there are some agencies that are obvious that we will work with, like the State Department or the Department of Education. But then there are all these other agencies that have important touch points to the welfare of the Jewish community and fighting hate and extremism, like the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the U.S. Department of Interior and Transportation, and so many more that partner with ADL in order to combat anti-Semitism and extremism. And I want to just conclude by saying that that sort of leadership and relationship that leads to action, it's not only confined to the federal administration. We similarly are very successful in our advocacy and our engagement of members of Congress. We work as a nonpartisan organization, and our networks and our leadership crosses party lines. And so, to give you an example, the Speaker Johnson, the Republican Speaker of the House, has led 5 different committees that are conducting oversight and working to fight anti-Semitism post 10/7. ADL has been a really close partner to the work that is happening in the Ways and Means Committee that deals with taxes. We had our director of the Center of Extremism testify a couple of weeks ago. We had Jonathan, the CEO, testify before the oversight committee. We have provided education, data, and resources to those that are investigating the education committee that is investigating what's happening on campus. Our leadership really extends throughout the federal government, both in the Biden administration and on both chambers of Congress with Democrats and Republicans.
And I'll just add regarding Ambassador Lipstadt and her office, she's doing a tremendous job, and both our teams are in very direct contact with her and her team. Her mandate is more focused on global anti-Semitism outside the US. She's been traveling a lot, and we've been traveling to the same countries in several instances. We've been supporting her work as much as possible, again, out of the understanding that we need to work together with everybody that is in this space and has an influence. I think that the US administration has a tremendous potential to influence many governments around the world to do more to fight anti-Semitism, and the Biden administration has been doing that. And I'm sure that also the next administration will keep doing that.
Thank you. My next question is actually to Andrew. And, you know, this is it's really tough to shove in so many difficult topics into 1 hour. We can just the knowledge and insights of the 3 of you, we can probably fill at least a few days. But one of the topics that is rising again and again on all the groups, WhatsApp groups from the greater Philadelphia area, and my colleagues in the West Coast and Boston, New York, etc., is K-12. And I want to direct this question to Andrew, because really your career before ADL has been education. And even now you're dealing in the last 10 months or so with so much anti-Semitism, even on the level of K-12, School District Philadelphia as an example. So, you know, just some of the conversations that I see all the time between parents is, what should we do? What should we do? Should we take out our kids in middle school and high school, less so in elementary school, but starting to, out of the public school, because the anti-Semitism, we just want to protect our kids. We want to protect our kids. We don't want them to hear awful things that, you know, we all heard horrible examples that our children are exposed to. And we should maybe move them to a private school, you know, Perlman in our area and many other Jewish schools, to kind of protect them and shelter them. Other people think, well, we have to battle this. We can't basically seclude ourselves from the society because of the anti-Semitism, and we must fight back. What is the involvement of the ADL with the K-12, and what are your comments, Andrew, about all of this?
Wow. So just to put out, my career was in education. My career was mostly in higher education. I have a lot of knowledge in K-12, and I've been involved in K-12, but my work experience was universities and colleges, and my doctorate's in higher education administration. You know, look, I think first and foremost, with regards to the specific question of parents making decisions, I'm going to say something here that I was saying to people because I was getting asked this question about what college should I go to? Where should I send my kids to college? And I know from my time in higher ed, whether it's K through 12, whether it's private school, whether it's colleges or universities, each student is different and each school is different. And each parent knows their student the best. And you have to be in consultation with your student and with the people at the school to decide what's best for your own student. For one student, it may be better to take them out and put them in private school. For another student, it may be best to stay there. Now, I do believe firmly that we have to stand loud and proud in our Jewish culture and Jewish identity. I think only if we are talking about who we are as Jewish individuals? Will people learn about us more than the anti-Semitic tropes? One of the reasons that anti-Semitism has persisted in the way that it has and where it's impacted differently from other types of isms is it's based on anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that have literally lasted millennia, and they just evolved for the time. And I want to come back to that in a comment for in a moment, but that's where we have to look at it. When it came to colleges, you know, look, have there been significant issues at colleges? And absolutely. And you know which ones those are. Some of those colleges are also the colleges that have some of the most vibrant Jewish communities on campus. And so what is it that your student wants or needs is really something you have to talk with them about. Are they going to be better off at a school where maybe it's less of an issue and not talked about? Or are they better going to some place where maybe there are some significant issues, but part of the reason why there is a loud and proud and strong Jewish community that's there. And so you've really got to decide for your own student. You know, we've been involved regionally in all of our regions educationally for years. And trying to get individuals to address this moving forward. One of the things I want to note, especially here in the Philadelphia region, so this isn't Philadelphia, this is Eastern Pennsylvania, Southern New Jersey, and Delaware. We had 394 incidents of anti-Semitism that made it into our audit in 23. That's up from 112, 114 in 22. A significant number of those were in K through 12. We had 0 anti-Semitic assaults in 2022. We had 5 in 2023. All of them were in the age group of K through 12. 4 of them happened before October 7th. So I think that this is important data and statistics to know and understand as we talk about the problem and the rise of the problem and what decisions have to be made in schools and administrations. You've got to hold your schools accountable. You've got to hold your administrations accountable. You've got to get involved in school boards. You've got to get involved at the local level. You know, I think everybody pays attention to the presidential election. I see some questions about the presidential election. I will say, sorry, Karen, and you know me well, we are a 501c3. I can't answer that question, not going to answer that question. We are a nonpartisan organization, and we work with any party fighting hate and anti-Semitism, regardless of who is in office. But all of that's to say, with this in the education component, you know, each parent has to make their decision. Now, going back to, and I want to comment on this whole history of anti-Semitism, sharing personally, I actually didn't pay attention a lot to ADL, and I had experienced anti-Semitism, but I never experienced fear around anti-Semitism until after Tree of Life. But when I really started paying attention to ADL was actually after the Unite the Right rally at UVA. When UVA happened, and as a higher ed person, I paid attention a lot to what was happening on other college campuses. And to remind folks, that protest was actually about people taking down Confederate statues. The people who were protesting at the Unite the Right wanted the Confederate statues to stay up, yet they were chanting, "Jews will not replace us." And I remember hearing that and saying to myself, what on earth is this about? And I didn't know. And that's when I learned about the Great Replacement conspiracy theory, which is this conspiracy theory that white America is being replaced by Black and brown people, and that this cadre of Jewish people in power are facilitating that. It's the conspiracy theory that the shooter used in the Tree of Life massacre to justify why he did that there. It's also the same reason that the person chose to shoot up the Top supermarket in Buffalo. And this is only an evolution of the power trope, which has been in existence since long before 1900, 1800, and for millennia, of this excessive power that Jews allegedly hold, that just evolves with the time. And so needing to educate and continuing to educate and how those tropes come into play. And I'll also share another personal story that I often share in presentations. I'm 50. I entered college in 1991. I grew up in Staten Island, New York. I went to school in Buffalo, became really friendly with this guy who grew up in a farm town in rural New York. We hung out the first weekend, we hung out the second weekend. At the middle of the second weekend, he said, "Hey, Andrew, you want to hang out this weekend?" I said, "No, I can't. I'm going home for Rosh Hashanah." And he looked at me dumbfounded. He said, "What's Rosh Hashanah? I don't even know what that is." I said, "It's the Jewish New Year." And he looked at me and he's like, "You're Jewish?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, you can't be. I said, no, I'm pretty sure. I went through Hebrew school, got bar mitzvah, whole 9 yards. And he said, but Andrew, and he looked at me deadpan face and said, you don't have horns. He grew up in a town where at his church, somebody said that the reason that Jews wear hats and yarmulkes is we are covering up our demon horns. This is an evolution of the deicide trope of killing Jesus and demons. And who believes that a human being has horns? Is that an anti-Semitic comment? Absolutely. Is he anti-Semitic? I would actually argue, no, we're still friendly. And he engaged with me on it, and he just had never interacted with a Jewish person ever in his life. And that's where, for me, you know, I think for those of us who live in Philadelphia, I think for those of us who live in New York and places where there's large Jewish populations, I think we lose sight of how many people don't know Jewish people, don't understand us. And so educating about Jewish culture, Jewish identity, and being loud and proud about our identity is an important aspect so that people get to know us and understand us and where we're coming from and aren't just swayed by those tropes. And that's why when tropes are used against Israel in particular, whether it's blood libel trope or whatever, if that's the only interaction that somebody has had with a Jewish individual, it only reinforces those conspiracy theories. And so this is where the IRA definition, the education, and those components come into play as doing it. So going back to your first question, make the decision you need for your own kid, but be proud where you can be.
I want to thank you. This was really interesting, Andrew. 5 minutes and we're done. And the last question is basically from Marina and Max. And it's just a broad question. If you have suggestions, because a lot of people will watch this webinar as well. And what should we be doing? You know, there were some, Marina gave some suggestions, Andrew gave some suggestions in education, join, you know, the school board, join this and join that. But there's a lot of other stuff, you know, when we see a lot of people, a lot of the Jewish people, we see anti-Semitism, we see events. I'm in the healthcare, I see horrible things both on systemic and personal level. And the question is, what are your final thoughts or suggestions to people who are watching this webinar in terms of action points? What can we do to improve the situation for all of us, reporting or anything else?
So yeah, first I want to say something to Lori. She asked a very long question, but I loved it actually. I know that we don't have time to go into the details, but Lori, you made me think. She mentioned, why are we talking about rise in anti-Semitism and not saying that anti-Semitism post-October 7th was unleashed, right? And this goes also to what Andrew was talking about and what I mentioned in the beginning, that anti-Semitism was on the rise for the past 10 years in the US, also in the UK, not in all countries, but in quite a few. So for sure, anti-Semitism was not invented on October 7th or October 8th. So you gave me some food for thought. And, you know, I think that each one of us has a spectrum of possibilities of what we could do to fight anti-Semitism. And it starts with, you know, joining your WhatsApp groups and getting information. It starts with going on the ADL website and seeing all the resources that we have for parents, for students, for people in workplace that are facing discrimination for being Jewish, participating in these webinars, supporting, of course, organizations like ADL and others that are fighting hate and discrimination. Speaking up, not only when something happens to you, but when you see others that are being discriminated. And I'm not just talking about Jews, of course. We fight hate in all its forms. Talking about it with colleagues and friends. Sometimes, you know, a lot of Jews in the US and around the world felt alone post-October 7th in their workplace, where there are not many Jewish people. But it also created this opportunity to gather and create groups of Jews in the workplace or in university, if you don't have a Hillel or a Chabad or other organizations, to talk together and to get organized and to get educated. And I just want to say on something that Andrew mentioned, and it's in one of the questions about the importance of Holocaust education. yes, Holocaust education is very important, and our data also shows it, but it's not enough. We have to educate also about the living Jews and not just the dead Jews. So, you know, there are several countries in the world where all Holocaust education is mandatory. And then people just hear about dead Jews. They have no idea about the Jewish family that lives next door and what is Rosh Hashanah, like Andrew said, and that we don't have horns, etc. So it's our responsibility, and not just the governments or the ministries of education around the world, to educate our neighbors, our colleagues, people on the street, and explain what we're all about, and that there's a diversity of Jews around the world, that we're not all the same, we don't all act the same, we don't all look the same, and so on. So the educational part, it's not just about ADL and others having trainings for schools and for campus students, but also each one of us doing our own job as an active Jew in educating our peers.
Yep. I echo what Marina said. I think that, you know, we've been at the talking for about 75 minutes, and I think it's about time that we turn what's been a grim, difficult conversation into a more uplifting one, because there is some good news. There is a silver lining here. We are strong. We are coming together. We are stepping up to the moment. All of you are really part of the solution. In partnership with ADL, almost 800,000 of you have engaged in our advocacy, in our call to action, in being advocates, in supporting responses, proactive efforts in order to deal with anti-Semitism and hate. You are spokespeople to confronting discrimination, anti-Semitism, and other forms of hate. You are leaders in your community, you are neighbors, you are friends, you are using your own bully pulpit to reach people with regards to education and understanding, and pushing back and countering the hate and anti-Semitism we're seeing. There are lots and lots of allies and partners that we have throughout society. We find them all over Congress. Oftentimes, the media, the attention focus on a very few that are standing against Israel or the Jewish community, but we've had record support financially for Israel. We've had historic actions with regards to fighting anti-Semitism, both from Congress and from the administration. We've got important oversight. We've got leaders and leadership in showing up and pushing back against the incidents of discrimination that our community and others are witnessing. We have responses from decision makers at all levels of society, from city government to colleges and universities. We've got allies, we've got solidarity and support from other communities, from communities, vulnerable communities, from faith communities. And there is an awareness, there's an awakening of the Jewish community. There's a new Jewish energy with regards to coming together, finding greater coordination and cooperation, and for us to lead the fight against sort of like the ill that we are seeing it. It's an uplifting moment, and I think is one that we all need to recognize for the hope that it provides for what society will be like when we succeed together, for the experiences that our children and future generations will have in the United States and globally. It's up to us to make that difference. We do it together. We do it through ADL, and we do it through other community organizations. This is the moment when we come together, we step up, and we make a difference.
And then I thank you, Max and Marina, both for your comments and participating tonight. I think two things I just want to quickly close with. One, as Max pointed out, 800,000 people have joined in on our actions. For those of you who learned about this webinar, not through ADL listservs, but maybe through your ears, other WhatsApp groups and others, please reach out to our office at ADL at Philadelphia at adl.org. And we can get you signed up on our listserv so that you can be part of those action alerts when they come about and learn more about what's going on there. And then along with that place of hope, a lot of people ask me how I can do this job every day because I do see everything that comes in. What gives me hope and what gives me a lot of place of very positive feeling is, as much as we see the negativity, the thing that doesn't make it into the news, the thing that doesn't make it into people's social media feeds, are all the people who do come out in support of us and as allies after the fact. And I get the privilege of meeting and engaging with those individuals. And I can promise you, I know sometimes it doesn't feel that way. Those numbers are greater. Those numbers are greater, and we just have to continue to mobilize.
And the other positive thing is just like I can tell you from I feel the community more than the Jewish community around me, more than any, more than any other time in my life. I feel it, I have new friendships, Karen and Daphne and Jill and a million people that we now interact, and it extended and empowered our community. So with that, thank you so much, Max and Marina and Andrew, for all that you're doing. It was great. And thank you for the participation of the audience. And we'll share with you the recording. So toda rabba for all that you're doing, and Laila Tov.
Laila
Thanks so
Tov.
much. Good night.